Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bar Reserve Podcast, Episode 2. Today, we have with us a product leader who has been building beautiful product experiences for last almost a decade. I have with me Rohan Chaudhary, Vice President of Product at Glance in Mobi. Uh, Rohan, can you please introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about what you have been building at Glance?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Avinash. Excited to be here. Always happy to share my learnings in product management. Product is deeply close to my heart. That's what I've done 10 years at InMobi, just completing a decade at InMobi. So what do I do? So I basically run product at Glance. Uh, Few of us built Glance 4 or 5 years back. It was literally a InMobi Labs initiative on how we actually ended up building Glance, and being part of the founding team have done pretty much all that it takes to actually get a product from 0 to 1, 1 to 10. Lots of learnings there, lots of things I will not repeat again as mistakes. So happy to share all of that today. Just about Glance is a very unique product. What we tried to do with Glance was that we reimagined the traditional lock screen where people have for the longest time just put their wallpapers of their friends, family, etc. And we converted it into a proper content discovery platform itself, where you could literally start your digital journey. Millions of Indians start their digital journey on the lock screen because you don't need to really download any apps, you don't need to open any apps. Whether it is news, whether it is entertainment, whether it is gaming, all of it is available in a very visual, video first, vernacular form directly on the lock screen of millions of consumers. That's what Glance is. We stand for you know democratizing content access to everyone out there without the need for a huge tech literacy or the need for huge English literacy. The idea is everyone should have access to content in a beautiful manner, and that's what we have done on Glance with the lock screen.
Great. So, Rohan, you have been part of this ecosystem for a long time. About by ecosystem, I mean the startup ecosystem in India, right? So, can you tell me how do you feel how it has evolved over more than about 10, 15 years of uh, building products and how it has changed and particularly how product management has changed over the years.
Sure. So it's an interesting question. I mean, few thoughts, right? So one thought is that in the last few years, I have seen a lot more properly product driven startups come up. By that, what I mean is there is no offline component. Everything is online, literally. And there the product is the product. You can't really do more than that. There is no operations. There is no other offline element to all of it. So what one thing that I have surely seen is that a lot more and therefore the mindset of the founder has also shifted from being sales or operations led
Yeah.
to
Yes.
being very product led, because product gives you that amount of leverage and scalability that nothing else can. So one big shift I have seen is just what used to happen in the Bay Area 10 years back or 15 years back, where there were digital only products, where there was no offline journey involved. Now that has started in India as well, Glance being one example of it. Any case, so that I think is one big shift that has led to newer kind of skills also required from the product managers needing to push themselves. That's one. I think second is I would say that uh, this this thought that rapid innovation can actually create value, in the sense that that like the Indian cricket team, right? I mean,
Yes.
in the last 2 years, all that I thought in terms of how folks should play cricket has shattered with this entire Pant versus Pujara mindset. The Pujara mindset is that you go slow, you build your foundation, and then you go from there. And the Pant mindset is you can hit a six from the get go. And of course, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. But what at least I have learned is that, and in my own journey as well, is that in 2015 I would think that it'll take 6 months for me to reimagine or launch something, right? That was like the expectation of everyone, including the founders, including the leadership, that it'll take that time to launch things. It's I think it's just a shift now where it feels like that you can actually launch things in 3 months as well. It's a mindset shift, I would say, that you can be very innovative and you can really cut the time to market and very agile about launching products. I just feel that this shift has happened a lot more in India in the past few years, and personally I have seen that shift in myself, so I can completely relate to it. So that's the second one, I would say. The third one, which is also very interesting and personal to me as well, is the use of AI. So I think, see, what typically happens to a product manager is that they typically like to feel that they can debug a product and they can imagine the full product, and they don't like black boxes in general as product folks, right? Because we are deeply, like, very deep about stuff, and we would want that we have full control over what the end experience to the user is. I think what AI has enabled is that you can do things that you couldn't imagine before. So, for example, at Glance itself, I remember that 2 years back, our data sciences team came up with a way in which you could literally automate the entire content creation. Right now, as a product manager, I would not even realize it, because for that you need to be up to date with what is happening in the world of data science or in the world of AI, which perhaps only the AI folks do. So what I realized was that innovation from AI is like this 10x lever, which you're not able to imagine as a product there, and then it suddenly hits you later. So therefore, I just feel that AI is at the core of your unique value prop, or your core differentiator, is a very real thing now, which was perhaps not the case many years back. It was more an enabler. So that's the other one. And one last one, which again I have seen more in the last 2 years, as digital only products have become very powerful, is the importance of consumer research. So see, earlier, I think a large part of the user journey was also offline. Right. For example, when you buy a product from Flipkart, a large part of your journey is also what happens once you press the buy now button, right? Or press the order button.
Right.
And that journey you can control, because that's in the DNA of Indians to build large operations, for example, right? But I think what has happened is that as you build digital only products, you can't just keep throwing shots in the dark and then hoping they will stick. That doesn't work. So I think it's just purely about laziness, I think, of product folks at times, that they will not do concept testing, or they will not do basic hypothesis validation with their consumers. And that one step, that building that small user research team, goes a long way in not making mistakes. So I think, especially in today's world, where a lot of these pure products have come in, where if the entire journey is residing on the product, consumer research is key. And I can clearly see that shift happening. I mean, literally a year back, it was hard to hire user researchers. There were so less in the market. Yes. And suddenly it has completely shifted. It's one of the roles people want to get into. So these are some of, some different thoughts on what I have seen kind of shift in the product management world over the last few years.
Also, do you think, it is also because, the scale at which digital products operate now in India is very different to which they operated like 10 years back?
Yeah. No, it's actually very true. See, think about it. Even on Glance, for example, we have 14 to 17-year-old students, right, who have just come to smartphones because of COVID, because they now need to do their online education via phones. We have college students, we have blue collar workers, we have homemakers, we have IT employees, and literally folks who are also above 60, for whom perhaps this is their first smartphone, right? So suddenly your user cohorts have just completely just gone 10x. And what that means is that, I mean, sitting today, I can relate with a couple of cohorts, right? But I can't relate with 90% of India, right? And especially, we always call this, right, that in Bangalore or in Delhi, we're always living in this bubble. And how do you build for the rest of the India, right? So I just feel that with more and more consumers going on the smartphone, this importance of consumer research will go much more, because you will not be able to relate with the consumer yourself. So you need to set up research teams who can actually do this in a scientific manner. So that, and of course, I mean, all the other things that I also mentioned, for example, AI, you can't do it by rules anymore. If you have so many users, right, you have to actually build algorithms. So that's why, I mean, you're right. A big part of it is about the fact that the user scale itself has gone multifold.
Also, do you think now, people are getting, specialized in particular areas, in the sense that someone may have a lot of experience building AI side of a product. Someone may have great experience building user experience and incorporating in the product. And yes, those expertise is also building up in a focused sense.
Yeah, I think personally, I think product is the last function where specialization has happened. For example, if you look at UX, for example, visual design, interaction design, the user research pieces, there's always been specialization, right? Technology, there always been specialization. DS, there always been specialization. I think now, as product management comes of age, even in India, we are finally seeing specialization happen. There are different kinds of product managers. There are people who will do great at PMF. There are people who will do great at the growth stage of a company. There are people who are great at building internal platforms which lead to scalability. And I realized that you having that one core differentiator of you as a product manager really helps make you stand out as well.
Great. Rohan, that brings us to our next question. See, you have seen, a company at all stages, right? Or even product at all stages. At a very initial stage, they say, when we are discovering the product market fit, as it's called, or maybe in a simpler term, the usability of a product to the audience, right? Or 0 to 1 stage, then there is a stage which is where we try to scale that product from a limited number of users to a large number of customers, right? Which we can say 1 to 10 stage, and then there is a 10 to 100x kind of a stage as well, right? So how do you think, how to while building a product team, or while building internal expertise around product, how it changes with different scale of the team, different stages of the company?
This is a question really close to my heart, because I have seen that journey with Glance. And when I talk about this journey, I actually start from 1 to 0, so which I call as a failed PMF that we had in the very early days of Glance. So let me start with that, and then we'll go from 1 to 0 to 0 to 1 as really the part of learnings. So if I just go back, and I'll illustrate this with some examples so that it is more real for everyone. So in 2016, when we were trying to build Glance, much before that, we were trying to build some products for OEMs in general, where what we were trying to do was that how can you make money via services and advertising for OEMs in general, right? The handset manufacturers. So we were trying some things, and we had hit upon some idea. I'll not share the idea rather, but I'll share the learnings around it. So there was some initial hope from some idea that we had hit. Now, what we did was, it was still very early days. We were a very small team, and we had not figured everything out. But we gave limelight to the idea too early. So what happened was that, everyone in the company started talking about it, and we were thinking that, this is perhaps the next big thing in advertising, etc. And what that did was that suddenly, you were not giving yourself the chance to fail or the chance to course correct, because now there is this thought that, we've come up with an idea. Now we need to really make it work, and not giving you the chance that, perhaps an adjacent idea or something in the vicinity might actually be better. So one big learning I had was to not give limelight to ideas too early, till they at least hit 0 to 1 or even 1 to 10. Even during that, one should actually be open to kind of pivoting a bit, because otherwise there is just too much internal pressure you create. And in the end, you don't end up discovering the truth. So therefore, I think that was one big learning for us. The other big learning for us was that you shouldn't try to hire sales too early, because when you try to hire sales too early, what happens is that, again, especially in B2B products, for example, or B2B2C products, in our case, we launch Glance via OEMs, right? So it's a very unique product in general. What we realized was that if you hire sales, what will happen is that they will try to adapt to the customer too fast. And what that does is that you lose the DNA of what you are trying to build, because you're perhaps trying to close a contract or trying to close a sale too fast, and in the process not really realizing the real pain point of the consumer at times. So at least I believe that people who create the product should be the first salespeople of it, because then only they actually realize whether it is selling or not. Otherwise, what happens is you create this one layer between yourself and the actual consumer, and also the product in general, right? So you just lose control or lose that feeling of that, what you're building and where it is going. So that was the other one, that don't try to hire sales so early that you again go on the wrong path. The third big learning for us was that, there was a time during the mid of 2016 when we thought that, we said that, are we going anywhere? So we imagined our world 6 months down the line or 12 months down the line, and we looked at, okay, what will we call success? And we realized that we are actually nowhere even close to, right now, not even in the journey to hit that success, right? And it's a huge checkpoint, because otherwise, you just get lost in the daily work. 24 hours you could always fill to consume and do anything that you want, right? Especially in startups and early ideas. So having this checkpoint and really asking yourself and being authentic helps, which we did. So we had a fairly large team. We had 40-50 member folks, but we could see that, the PMF is not there really in reality. And therefore we were very authentic to ourselves. We said that, let's not go after sunk costs. Let's just see whether this is going anywhere or not. And I remember that time that literally, those 50-member teams then literally disbanded, and we went back to like a 5-10 member team trying to figure out, what should actually be the product. It was a difficult time, but what it helped us do was that it helped us get back to the drawing board completely. So I think that was the third big learning, that, don't go after sunk costs. For example, don't worry about sunk costs and be authentic to yourself, that is this going anywhere or not.
Yes.
So those are different things that helped us actually shut something down and actually build something awesome. Very difficult to do, but personally a journey that I learned a lot from.
So Rohan, when you say internal pressure, is it about pressure from the internal teams, or it's about, pressure from inside, subconscious pressure, which we create on our own self, right? Failing is difficult. Accepting failure is even more difficult, right?
See, I think when the idea is restricted to a few people, you are typically okay with pivoting or failing and correcting. Suddenly, when it is too much in the open, right, it just puts some outside pressure. See, because subconscious pressure you have to handle when you're building a startup, because you will go through pivots all the time. But I think when a lot more people get to know about it, you find it hard to kind of, change it fundamentally, because you just want it to succeed now because everyone else has seen it. And also organizations would have invested a lot of money behind it, right? Because perhaps sometimes too early, right? So those are all the different pressures that start playing on you. And then it's this, right, that you can always force fit in your mind that something will work. But in reality, reality will hit you in a couple of years. It's like this, it's like water which is hot, it is not boiling. So therefore it's just there, you're there, and then you die one day, right? So those are the things that really end up influencing.
Rohan, also a little bit more on product market fit, and how success metrics and product market fit are used to judge.
So
actually,
no, fair. I think only over time did I realize what is the right metric to measure PMF. I think, and it's a known metric. It is simply this, that you ask your consumers that if tomorrow the product did not exist, how deeply will they be affected, or their life be affected? And that, I think, I forget the name of the person, but I think the rule of thumb is that 40% of your target segment has to basically say that, it will matter to me, that if this product goes away, then you are somewhere close or in the vicinity of doing things, right? So this is a metric we did start to employ later in Glance a lot, to figure out which TGs we are where the PMF has hit. So I like this a lot, because this is very subjective in that sense from a consumer standpoint, but I think it just nails the point that you have to be valuable to the consumer at the end of the day. So that's what we have started using a lot more, even when we do PMF expansion on Glance as well, when we try to build newer adjacent products as well. So that's one metric we have started using.
That was really insightful.
So
great. I think our audience must, this is a point to note for everyone watching this podcast. Interesting.
Great. Let me also talk about the 0 to 1 part of Glance, because once the 1 to 0 happened, the 0 to 1 was important, of course. And I think few learnings there as well, which were very interesting. And if you don't go through that journey, you don't realize it. So one was, of course, the idea of minimum lovable product, which we all know, but actually we experienced it ourselves, in the sense that it's this balance of that you should not let perfect be the enemy of good, right? But you should also not build something completely like which is not there yet, and you're just calling it MVP. So the way I realized it was that so see, I was coming from a B2B world where you take your time in building a product, and all that time was taken really to refine it, etc. And my engineering team, however, was very B2C. So they were literally pushing updates every week to the Play Store, which were not always like they'll be 80-90% there. They will not be 100% there, but they would do the job. And it would really be unsettling for me, because I would feel like that, this nook and corner is not properly done. This is not properly done. But I realized over time that it actually did not matter too much, because if you were delivering the core value, even if slightly inefficiently, consumer will do whatever he needs to do to get the value. So therefore, focus on the core value in that product matters more than trying to solve for all possible funnels, feeling that it is perfect. You're actually better off launching it fast, because that will actually give you a far faster feedback on whether it is going somewhere or not. So I think one big learning, I know a lot of founders know this, but at least for me, it was first time. And I think people should just remember that don't go after perfection, at least during the 0 to 1 stage, because you more need value discovery at that point in time. So that was one learning.
I think this concept of minimum lovable product is getting also very popular now. It was not so a couple of years back, right? So can you just elaborate a little bit more on minimum level product versus minimum viable product?
So, see, I think the name says it, which is that it should not feel like. So I'll tell you what I tell my team. I tell my team that it should not feel like a college project, for example. One of the things I tell my team is that minimum viable product. In the process of doing that, if you start building things which look like college projects, then what happens is that and that's the last 10% at times. What happens is that you're not giving yourself a chance to succeed. So for me, that's the delta. Of course, MVP always meant that you should focus on core value, but just the delta between MVP and minimum lovable is just this: that give it in the hands of a few consumers, and you might realize that you're missing some very obvious things. So I think the main delta there is whether you have done concept testing with your users or not, whether you've actually put it in the hands of a few consumers or not before launching it at some scale on Play Store, etc. That's the way I look at it. Otherwise, these are just words. So you need to have some rule of thumb. My rule of thumbs are these only: that it shouldn't feel like a college project. You should have actually put it in the hands of 10, 15 consumers, got some real feedback, seen what is the feedback that really matters at this point in time, and then go for it. So that's what I use as the rule of thumb. I think this will evolve over time for me as well.
Great.
So
so Rohan, yeah, we were in the process of defining one, I think.
Yeah, the 0 to 1, the 0 to 1 of it.
Yes.
So I think one was just this, right? That don't let perfect be the enemy of good, but don't build very shitty products as well. The other big learning, which was that do things that don't scale. So Glance was a unique product. We were trying to build something for the lock screen. It was a format that doesn't exist out there. So it meant that you have to kickstart a completely new visual story kind of a format for the lock screen. And no publisher, no one was willing to do it at the start, right? Also, we ourselves did not know what is the right format for the lock screen. We have to figure it out over time. So we literally, ended up hiring a small news editorial team. We ended up hiring a design team, and we actually did things by hand. Now, as a tech company, you will always deal with that. You need to have 100,000 pieces of content every day before the world even begins. But in reality, when you are in a 0 to 1, you actually need to get your first 100 pieces of content right, because then only you actually know what your product stands for and what will be the real challenges when you will even automate that journey, and what do you really want to give to your user as well. So it was very, very unorthodox for a company like InMobi, which was a tech company by design, to do such a thing that doesn't scale. But I would actually say that, out of several core differentiators, just this ops at the very start was itself a differentiator, because it just helped us figure out the right product market fit or the right content user fit also on the lock screen. And sometimes, especially if you have built large products before, your natural tendency is that whether I'll be able to scale it or not. While you should keep that in your mind, you should actually be okay with the fact that you don't know the full journey, and you're doing something which is non-scalable for a smaller cohort of users right now to gather learnings. So not having this immediate tendency that, let me just figure out how will I scale it, or let me not do it at all. What it does is it helps you not find new places of discovering value, because new places will always be like that. You will not be able to find scaled answers on day one. So that was the second big learning point for us when we were kind of doing the 0 to 1. The third was just operating in constraints, I would say. So basically what Naveen had kind of told us was that Naveen is the CEO of InMobi, had told us was that let's not build one more app, because we ourselves, being in the app business, had seen how hard it is to actually build and scale apps. So we had this constraint, and we realized just this constraint helped us innovate and figure out that, see, Glance in general, we don't really do user acquisition in the traditional manner. We actually integrate directly into Android, and that's been a key reason for Glance's success over the last 3 or 4 years, that there is no natural, you have to go to Play Store, then you need to discover it, then download it. All of this was not there. So just this constraint that we will not put user acquisition money helped us find a completely new way to actually, hack the CAC, as we say on Glance front, to hack and find a new way to do things as well. So sometimes I have felt that what happens is organizations would put too much investment into a very, very new idea, And what that does is that you don't allow yourself to innovate and find newer possibilities to do things, because those are the unique differentiators of your product eventually, which make it hard to replicate. So yeah, I think this was the other one that I found was very, very interesting. Um, One last one, which I also share a lot with my team as well, was not focusing on metrics very early, because I mean, at least me, I'm a very data oriented kind of a product manager for the longest time, and it was again very unsettling to see that we were only relying on WhatsApp feedback. Basically, we had some WhatsApp power user group, and for 3 to 6 months, we were only relying on them. But I think in hindsight, it was the right thing to do, because in the start, all you need are these sentences from the consumer on what delta is it making in their life, because otherwise metrics will hide a lot. Metrics, by the way, you can shape to give you any picture. That's how data is, right? So again, this is obvious, but a lot of people don't realize it, and they might feel that some metric is doing so well, but they might realize that the actual behavior behind it is not what you want. So that was the other one where our focus a lot was on just WhatsApp groups. We were just talking to consumers, getting feedback, and iterating the product in general. So yeah, these I would say, yeah, that those are all the things that were learnings in the 0 to 1 phase.
Great. Also, did you find it difficult initially to understand what metrics are, as in the sense, what are the balancing metrics? Sometimes initially, until the product really scales, quantitative metrics, like as you said, give more feeling than direct metrics. Because you don't know what will balance it, right?
No, you are right, and the balancing point is important, because if you veer towards one metric, some other metric would go down, but you don't even understand all of that at the start,
Yes.
right? So that's why I believe that I feel that you shouldn't have too many analysts in the start, because it just naturally makes you look at too many cuts, and it doesn't really help you. So I actually feel that in the start, just being close to the consumer, actually seeing whether his problem is getting solved is enough. Then slowly you can get into the world of habit formation and all those aha moment and setup moments and all those frameworks that we have. But doing them too early, you don't even understand what value your product is adding, right? So I mean, I can give you a very simple example that happened with us, that in the very start, consumers were spending long session times on Glance. So what was happening was, we were a very image based product 3 years back, beautiful images, that's all. So consumers would spend long session times just looking at the image, and they would see like 70, 80 images in a session and then go off. And therefore our usage was all about couple of long sessions in a day, right? Now I could have just looked at this metric and said that, let's just kind of build on top of it. The other was our natural intuition that, lock screen is a product that you use 100 times a day. So your sessions have to be short form by design, right? They have to be like, let me see something and let me go back. Let me see something and let me go back. Perhaps I'm not giving enough value. And that is why these short sessions are not happening. Now, if you go down the metric path without being aware of what your product's natural usage should be, this is what will happen. So that's a big learning for us as well. And we learned it by mistakes only, because we then realized what consumers are actually doing. And we didn't want to be just an image-based product. So naturally, I think just this learning was itself interesting. I mean, I call it like metrics from habits or habits from metrics. So you should always do metrics from habits. You shouldn't do habits from metrics, because then you're just force fitting stuff. So that's the other learning that I had.
Wow. Amazing, Rohan, amazing. So I think there are a lot of points to be learned. For me as well, it's really interesting to talk to you about that stage. Sure. Should we move to the next stage where maybe we can also a little bit define about what is 1 to 10 stage, or the initial scaling stage?
So see, I think it's well defined. I think 0 to 1 is when you have found your value and you have found your target cohorts, I think. And the 1 to 10 is where you scale over your target cohorts and you still don't kind of go after more adjacent cohorts. I look at 10 plus as the stage, as the growth stage, where you are actually moving to adjacent cohorts as well and starting to give them adjacent value, for example. So 1 to 10, I would say my biggest learning was knowing that you have hit 1 to 10, because a lot of people don't realize whether they have hit 1 to 10 or are they still in 0 to 1. And the biggest metric there, of course, one is the PMF metric, but the other is a flattening retention curve. It's obvious, but it's the one thing that kills companies, which is the retention curve. Like the most painful part of building a company is the retention curve. There is no doubt about it. So what I always say, at least in my team as well, when they're building features, is to not throw gasoline on a leaky bucket. That's the phrase we use, which is that if you know the bucket is leaking, don't do more. You should first fix the bucket. And there is this natural tendency to raise VC money and, of course, throw UA dollars at that. No doubt about it. But you need to know where to draw the balance, I think. So one big was just this resistance is important. Otherwise, at some point, it will kill you. It will not kill you immediately. So that was one big learning. Second was what I just said. The metrics from habits thing was very important for us, because past 0 to 1, you now need to start measuring your behaviors, but you still need to be careful what you're really measuring. That was the other one. One other interesting thing that I found in the 1 to 10 was that you should be clear what your core differentiators are and actually build on them, because that will make you hard to replicate as well. So for example, on Glance, our big differentiator was the fact that we had hacked the CAC in a way, right? Our big differentiator was that you don't need to spend on UA dollars. You have to therefore stick to the lock screen. So we could have easily gone down the path that let Glance be one more app, and you would have fundamentally lost the one differentiator you have in general, right? So as you are scaling, I think just knowing what makes you successful and actually building on top of that and not losing that differentiator matters a lot. Otherwise, you can, as a product manager, you can just get lost again in the daily scheme of things and think that, let me do everything. And in the process, not actually build upon the one value you have, which is fundamentally differentiated. So therefore, we have stuck over the last 4 years always to our concept of going to OEMs for our GTM, because we know that's what differentiates us. That's what makes our retention curve flattened. And our core content propositions are also linked to that proposition of a lock screen. So therefore, just knowing what your differentiators are helps you in 1 to 10 while making decisions, I would say. So yeah, there are many more, but I think these are the ones that come to my mind right now.
Basically focusing, everything on what makes you different, what actually is working, right?
Yes. Because otherwise there are infinite opportunities, especially in India. There are startups coming for every small adjacent thing. You will have a startup.
Right.
So easy to go into that adjacent thing and then forget who you originally were, because that itself can be $1 billion idea. Right. So that, I think that resistance is needed and that focus is needed and that awareness is needed, I think. And I know that a lot of these learnings are for the founders as well, but personally, I have felt that till 1 to 10, anyways, founders are the product guys. You anyways can't hire a CPO at early stage and expect that, because product drives decision.
Or product guys are as good as founders.
Pretty much, yeah. Both ways. So it's because I feel that at least in these companies who are now extremely product driven, a lot of these choices are made by the product managers. Unlike the past, for example, where, for example, marketing had a huge role to play 20 years back, because products were not differentiated. Products were just commoditized and the same. So therefore, you depend on how you market them. Right. That's not the case anymore. So how you create matters now.
Absolutely.
So yeah, those were the 0 to the 1 to 10 learnings.
And now, when hundreds of millions of users are using Glance, it's in a kind of a 10 to 100 stage now,
Yeah.
What has changed? How product development, how thought, and also think of maybe a little bit about the timeline of product development, in the sense how bigger vision and is converted into product. Maybe we can talk a little bit about it. So sure. I know it's a very, very big topic.
Yeah. No, I think I would say that 10 to 100 is a learning process for me also. So what I am sharing right now, I'm pretty sure will evolve, or some of it I might nullify in 6 months for myself as well. So take that with that pinch of salt. I think one learning for me has been in the 10 plus stage that you need to remove white noise. So in the sense that what happens is, when you are at 100 million scale, you will always get a lot of white noise in your data, because you will always have these random users who have just come in, right? And they're not your core users. So, and they just end up skewing all your metrics. And what happens is, you will make a product release, you will realize a metric is either not moved or has moved in a negative direction, for example. A lot of it is because you are not segmenting your consumers properly. And therefore, because what happens is at 150 million DAO, where we are today, right? There will be a fraction of users who will behave in random ways for whatever reason, right? You don't even know some of those users, etc. So removing this white noise, we call it white noise in our company, that, these are these white noise users who are hiding the actual gold, or who are hiding the actual insight. You need to know how to remove it. And therefore, investing in an analytics team or a decision sciences team is very key, because what that does is that they keep you very glued to the ground in terms of they always give you the right kind of insight that is needed. The other reason why you should have an analytics team is that, see, if you have large scale products, right, you will always see some movement at times, and you will feel something has happened, and you will feel that, every product manager would think that their feature has actually contributed. But in reality, and that's your tendency, right? You want your features to succeed. So in reality, if you have an analytics team and a way of looking at things, a way of removing white noise, it becomes more clear as to whether what is really helping, because the cause and effect becomes far more difficult in a high scale product now, because there are so many different segments operating in so many different ways. So I think one interesting thing we did, at least in the last 1.5 years, to invest in an analytics, or now what we call as decision sciences team, because it just disambiguates a lot of stuff and helps you make the right decisions. That's, I think, one big learning for us. The second, I think, has been that it is, as you scale, right, it is important to hire complementary folks. I'll talk more about it later in this conversation as well. But what I've realized is that, and I actually follow Ravi Mehta's framework there, on what are the different kinds of product managers. There are product managers who are great at PMF. There are product managers who are great at growth. There are product managers who are great at just feature building. So you need to have a very complementary team. And I mean, I have realized it the hard way, because the original team that you would have stuck with, for example, would have one kind of learnings, but you really need to get a very complementary set of folks who have done this somewhere else. While during the 10 plus stage, especially, because the scope of problems is a lot. At one angle, you're trying to expand your PMF. You're trying to say, can I do more for my consumers? At another angle, you have a cohort of users who is not engaging at all, so you need to figure out the growth pieces very deeply. Growth becomes very key. Scalability becomes very key, because you're now building scalable products. So, and not all skill set will exist in a company which has gone through this stage, because original folks will not have some of these strengths. So that, I think, is important. Just hiring complementary teams is important.
In that sense, can you also tell us, what kind of team formation as a product team formation works for at different stages, or you think is a good way to divide problem while you're building product at different stages?
Yeah. So, and by the way, I did not do some of these things. So some of these things are also basis what I could have done. So
that is okay. That's obviously.
So like the 0 to 1 stage, I realize you really need these artist PMs. That's what I call them, because it's not completely logical. The 0 to 1 stage is about, it's like finding needle in a haystack, I would say at times. And pure logic or pure that analytical mindset doesn't really help. So you need these, and there are these folks, there are these 0 to 1 folks out there who can help you find that needle in a haystack, who will be very artisty. You will not always get their approaches, right? They will not be your conventional product managers, but they will drive 10x impact, because they will reduce the time to find that value, or they will actually help you find that value. So I think it's a very right-brained kind of a thing, at least the 0 to 1, especially, I mean, at least I have seen this true for products like Glance, which are content first and, heavily about engaging with the user, etc. So there I have seen that 0 to 1, you are better off having such people. We actually have such people in the system now, and we can see, even when we are expanding the product market fit of Glance, how they are helping, because like they will they will kind of unshackle all your mental barriers on what is possible. So that's the 0 to 1 folks. The 1 to 10 stage, I would say you need more feature PMs, which are very predictable in terms of being able to deliver good quality features, right? You can trust them that they will actually, these are people who can ensure that if you have established an initial product market fit, then they will be able to build on top of that, put in the right features and expand that product market fit in general, right? So you need those folks who have built those features in multiple companies, and you can rely on them that once a problem statement is given, perhaps the best form of output will come from them. So that's what, at least, and I really use the Ravi Mehta framework here because it helps us, at least at Glance, that these are what we call as people who are great at features in general. You can rely on them for building good quality, valuable features for consumers within the ambit of a product market fit. You're not asking them to expand the product market fit. That's the second set. The third is the growth. The 10 plus is where you really need a growth team, because this is the set where you say that, I have 150 million users, or suppose someone has 500 million users, only 100 out of them might be deeply getting value. So you don't need to change the fundamental value, but you need to change your adoption of the product within the rest of the 400 set. And it could be all kinds of problem statements. It could be an accessibility issue. It could be a word of mouth issue. You're not really changing what the product is. You are basically changing, you're basically deploying growth tactics to improve adoption of your features. So that I think is a very key team. We're actually forming this team right now at Glance, already starting to see some impact. So I feel that's the third team that starts coming into play, the growth product team. And then of course there is a scaling team, which is basically about, how do you scale your serving systems? How do you scale your data systems? So you always need that technical product management team as well. Becomes far more important in the 10 plus and the 100 stage, I would say. That's how I look at it. I mean, if I do this journey the second time, I exactly know who to hire, what kind of folks to hire in the different stages of a company.
So generally, it seems like having a diverse team with it feels like hiring, getting a football team, right? Building a football team.
Yes.
Kind of where people have their specializations and who want to play where, right?
No, I completely agree. In fact, a lot of times what we tell our product team as well is that yes, while a product manager has to be good in some of these basic things, like for example, you have to have that fluency with data, you need to have consumer empathy, you need to have stakeholder management, you should do product delivery well, all of that. But you need some X factor as a PM as well on what makes you stand out. And that's how you build diverse teams as well, when you have multiple of those X factor folks, right? So for example, in our team, there'll be one person with an X factor of PMF, another person who is perhaps the best growth guy in the country, another person who would be, just awesome at building great features for the consumers, right? And that this doesn't only exist at senior leadership level. This goes down till the entire product management journey, right? So there'll be someone who is really great at working with data and building great data products. So I have realized that actually when you bring such a group together is when magic happens. And I mean, you have to do this in a very aware manner. You can't just do it randomly. You have to actually, as a product leader, you have to kind of, very carefully build your team in terms of what is the net delta that this guy is adding or this person is adding when you're building that team. So I mean, we do it very carefully at Glance because we know that complementary folks have to come in.
So from that question, just connected question is while a person is growing in a career as a PM, how should he shape his journey, or what should he focus on? As you said, how to build those X factor and how to understand your X factor.
So one of the things that has started helping us, and we have only recently started it, is I think there are two ways you can do it. One is a person has to himself be very self-aware, and therefore there is this framework which is called as what shape are you framework. Kind of what it does is that as a PM, it lets you evaluate yourself on, I think, 10 or 12 skills. And what if you were very self-aware yourself as a PM and controlling your journey, then you should actually evaluate. You should take your and your manager's evaluation on that shape. So that this is again coming from Ravi Mehta again. We use it at Glance as well, where what you do is that you evaluate yourself, that how well are you in terms of fluency with data? How well are you in terms of, you have to science out of it. You can't just make it like that, okay, let me see what happens. Let my experiences drive what will happen and we'll figure it out at the end. If you really want to take control of your journey, then you have to actually make a science out of it. And there is an existing science out of it, of what are the 12 or 13 skills that a product manager should have. And if they feel that, more and more, I can see that, the X factor is data, I would, or for example, the X factor is consumer empathy, I would actually spend 50-60% time there. Instead of saying that, let me build this diverse set of everything, but I'm not great at one thing. So you need to have that T shape, basically, that where you're deep in one thing for sure as a PM, and you still have appreciation for the rest of the pieces. You should be able to lead teams over time who can do the rest of the pieces, but there should be one thing you are really good at as well. And the only way to do it is that you need to control your own journey, in the sense that every 3 months evaluate where you are in that skill in terms of those 12 skills or 13 skills, and see whether you're getting the right kind of experiences in your company which help you move forward on one of them, which you think is your X factor. So either companies should do it, which we do at Glance, for example. We have tried to be very scientific about it now in terms of where you are in your journey as a PM and how can we give them fresh experiences that moves them. Or else if the company doesn't do it, you have to do it yourself. And I can tell that, if you do that, I have seen PMs who have fundamentally moved in their own journey because they scienced it out. They did not just leave it to fate and leave it to the company to give them the right experiences. That's the way I look at it.
Great. I think once in at some point we had a discussion. I'm bringing Narayan here, but who's the CTO. You told me he's as good a product manager and as good a technologist, and maybe that is also very interesting things where people are getting more specialized and going deeper into what they are building. So AI PM now almost a lot of them actually can be a very good product data scientists as well, because they are technically sound and they don't hesitate into going into deeper into the whole how things works as well.
No, I agree. And actually, AIPM especially is a very upcoming field. I would say the next next specialization in product management for sure is going to be AIPM, because I think the challenge has been product managers have not realized the power of AI and what it can do. And because you don't know, it's like a don't know for people. We don't even know what you can do with it, right? So you don't even know the business value you can create from it. So in general, yeah, I mean, especially on the AIPM point, I agree that it is very key. But yeah, as I said, even in the start, that I think product management now is a field where specialization has started to happen in a big way. And I think it's a good thing, because otherwise you will just remain a generalist and you will never be able to cause a 10x impact. I have realized that for you to cause a 10x impact, you need to be high on one such strength, which is unique about it, about you. Same reason why startups succeed is the same reason why employees will succeed, that they have to have that one thing that makes them stand out amongst the rest. And that helps the company succeed as well. So that's the way I look at it.
Great, Ruben. I think it was really insightful. So let's move to something different now. The world has changed in last 2 years, and we are seeing a lot of things happening remote. We don't get a chance to talk to each other, and particularly product management has been thought to, towards requiring a lot of one-to-one connections and a lot of one-to-one discussions. How things are happening remotely, do you think? And I think a lot of companies will not have a chance to now come together and build until sometimes in future. So what is your thought on it? What makes it efficient now, or how to make it efficient now?
It's a tough one, in the sense that there are advantages, I would say, of remote work as well. One of the big advantages I have seen is there is less group thinking, because what happens is when you are in your own home or in an isolated setting versus you being in a meeting room where there are 10 more folks, the chances of you agreeing are far more when you are with 10 more folks in the same room, because you want to agree as a human, right? So I think there is also a counter thought here that group thinking actually goes down. And I think individuals are able to contribute more and hit their potential. So I actually feel there is one advantage as well of remote work in general, of course, apart from the work-life balance. But I think the place where it suffers is when you need deep collaboration, or especially, for example, in value discovery exercises or 0-1 exercises, because what happens is you have to build on top of each other. It's not a world where you can simply isolate the problem statement to each of the folks, and each of them can do their job. It doesn't really work, especially when you are in very, very early stages of a product. So I think that's the one place which has struggled, I think, because pure innovation happening will become hard, especially where you have to come together and do something new for the world. So that's the one problem I have seen. And what at least we have done to remove it, for example, is what I did at times was to actually do hybrid meetings, which was that if folks were in the same city and we were not in the second wave or the first wave, then we would in a safe manner come together once in 15 days, for example, and just talk, or just brainstorm, right? And we will actually do it in the right way so that you're able to actually get something out of the session as well. But we have done this at times, that we have actually got a small team, not a large team, on a focused problem statement once in 15 days, get together and actually talk about it. Because we were not able to find a remote way to do 0-1. It was very hard. I mean, you can use all the tools, you can use the whiteboard tool and all of that, but it's still not the same, I would say. So one thing that we have seen work for us is at times once in 15 days, once in a month, the group getting together, at least the leadership group or someone focused on a problem statement. That is one thing that has really helped us. In terms of, so that's the one thing that I have seen not work. The other that I have not seen work or has not really done well in the remote work scenario is people's connect with your vision or people's own motivation. Because you have to keep in a startup, you have to like create this aura of that, you're doing something completely new for the world. And people have to be motivated by that, because this is not a 9 to 5 job. It is a job where you have to do everything that is needed to really succeed. So one of the things we did to solve for this was, very recently we launched demo days in Glance, and it was one of our leaders who did this. That what we did was that we launched every Friday demo day. Now, what it did was that suddenly everyone in the company could see what's happening. And demos are perhaps the best way to also see the company vision unfolding, right? Otherwise, you can keep saying it, but eventually people don't relate to it because they will just not pay attention. So we started doing these demo days every Friday. And it is difficult, by the way, to do a demo every Friday, by the way, for product managers. But what it did was it brought the company together in a very big way, because they were able to see the vision unfolding every week, see user feedback on top of it, and that helped. So some of these processes matter. The other process was that we are trying to see how we can leverage, I think, Teams in a big way. We use Teams a lot. And I think there are infinite possibilities with Microsoft Teams, for example, or some other collaboration tool. You have to actually have folks who are actually looking at how you can use Teams, in the sense that there is an actual team within InMobi and Glance who is looking at, are we maximizing the potential of Teams? Now, you wouldn't really care about this typically, but it really matters, because there are so many tiny features which can help you improve collaboration, and it's just a blind spot for all of us, right? So that's the other one that has helped us manage remote work, I would say. But I would still say, at least I am clear that for startups, the end answer is some combination of remote and in office. I don't think you can innovate beyond a point in a remote setting. I mean, see, I think the first few months after the lockdown were easy because you knew what you were doing. But as you started shifting into areas where you have to now find newer things to do, we struggled. So it is easy to carry forward what we are very clear about, but it is difficult to do things we are not clear about.
I think very interesting. Maybe I also give my perspective here.
Sure.
I have seen, the startups who are, I don't know, the startups who were started during pandemic. Maybe there can be a difference between who started before it and during pandemic. And there may be few startups who are now, because they have started during pandemic, may have find very innovative tools. And I asked them, everyone, about this. And maybe I also talked to them to find out if they had solved this problem. Few of them are actually doing very innovative things to bring people together and kind of communication protocol. But I've seen communication goes up, right? Do you see it like a good thing, or like a lot of time is getting wasted in communication in meetings, or what is your take in remote, how to structure meetings more, maybe, or
So actually what I have realized is that it's again a balancing act, by the way, in the sense that I actually realize in office sometimes you do a lot of useless meetings also because you're just there. So I actually feel that in remote, at times you are more efficient about meetings that are really needed. So that's part one. But I of course also know that what could have just been a coffee conversation needs a meeting now. So it's again a balancing act, but I'm again saying it's a balancing act. It's not all in favor of in office. There are actual advantages of remote as well, that you don't generally waste your time doing meetings that don't need to be done. Because when you are in the office, you're just there, right? So you will just keep doing meetings because you can see everyone, and you will get into meeting rooms for just discussing even the minutest of problem statements.
Yeah, actually, a lot of product managers I talk to now say that they get very little time to think now, because they are in meetings all the time. Do you think there is some way to make that, they restrict to their schedule or something where they can make time for themselves, right? Because they need to think also to build things.
So see, I think it is also about the product manager himself, in the sense that, see, if you had, so for example, at Glance, what we have done is that we have these pods. Mm-hmm. So every product manager is part of a pod where there is an engineer, there is a data scientist as well, there is someone from marketing as well, and they're solving a user problem statement. So everything is designed around pods. Every person in the system knows their OKR, and it is linked to a pod. Now, what that does is it empowers the rest of the teams. Now, if you have been a product manager who was a control freak, for example, and you will need every bit of detail to be thrashed out with your engineering, you will struggle. because you just need too much collaboration for that to happen. But if you are a product manager who has given that much context to your DS teams, to your engineering teams on the why, the what of the problem statement, and they're equally empowered, I actually feel that you will not necessarily feel the strain. So it also is about what your original style has been as a product person as well. I mean, in reality, good product folks necessarily don't create Jira tickets. They would give context and the why and a little bit of what to the engineering teams, and then they would execute. So it's also about how much you've empowered your team, I would say. And if you've done that, then I actually have found more time to think. By the way, I must be frank, because somehow I think if you know you have given the right context to your teams, you actually get more time in the day. Somehow I have, it might be counterintuitive, but I've actually found more time in the day to think when I am actually working from home, because you can have these deep pockets of time where you can actually isolate yourself, because no one can actually, it's not the office, right? In the office, if you are there, something or the other will always be happening. But in the home, if you're aware and you set up your structures well, you can actually find more thinking time as well. So I think it goes both ways. You have to leverage what you have.
Great, great, great. Rohan, I think it's almost time. It has been a really, really insightful discussion. I think it's a lot to learn for me, my team, as well as I am sure to our audience as well. Before we end, we have a small rapid fire round for you. We'll ask quick questions to you and get quick answers from you.
Okay.
So let's do that.
Awesome.
So Rohan, so what has been how would you define your career so far?
I would say every day is different.
So what keeps you running? What's your motivation of what motivation for work?
I think it is typically the why, in the sense that it should be, there should be some why of the what that I'm doing. If the why is deeply exciting, then I will go for it. Otherwise, it's very tough to motivate yourself.
Your hobbies?
Nowadays I'm reading a lot. So I think nowadays it's reading, and somehow in the last few months reading a lot of spiritual books. Just got that time. So that's the current hobby actually.
Favorite drink? I know, but let's ask for the audience.
Favorite drink, is it? I think that's the most famous thing about me at my company. It's Diet Coke.
Coke. So a decision framework, then I think I've got the answer, but how do you make decisions?
I think, I always go back to the original why the company exists in the first place. And the why of what we are trying to do really helps me typically to make the decisions, because it helps me go back to the original framework.
Best way to hire, best people?
I would say typically from the network, from your own network. You always need this one referral of a person that has worked with that person. So from your own network, from referrals, that's the best way.
So any product managers you follow, or get inspired from?
I actually love what the Reforge guys are doing. I only got introduced to it not more than a year back, but I love what the folks there are doing. They're actually making a science out of product management, each of those guys, right? So Ravi Mehta, of course, is one guy that I do look up to, because he has just provided the right thinking frameworks for product managers, which has helped me in decision making as well.
Great. I think that is all. I think it was really, really lovely talking to you. We all learned a lot. Thank you for sparing your time and coming here to talk to us. Look forward to meeting you once things get better and we are able to travel.
No, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Avinash. I'm always happy to do this. Hope it helps folks.
Thank you, Rohan. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, folks. So this was our second, episode of the podcast. Keep following us for, more podcasts in doing interesting discussions around building various products, technologies, or hiring folks you would love to work with. Until then, see you. Bye-bye.